Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' base capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, radiocallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's the 10th of July, and it's glorious outside. The sun is shining. Shells are still dropping over Ukraine, but that's like the standard for the last month now. Elon got booted from Twitter for like, what was it, 48 hours, 24 hours? And what else happened? Not a lot happened. I think this last few days was pretty dry, actually.
I'm realizing the way that they're framing it, there's going to come a time when more people die in the United States from gun violence than have died during the quote-unquote Ukrainian war. Mark my words, that's going to happen if it hasn't already. And then it will be undeniable that the right wing and America, like as far as the police go, are at war with people who are not aware that there is a war that's already been happening that is like escalated to a hot war. It's been a hot war for a while, but I think the problem is like it's hard to frame it as if it's a civil war because it's not like the Confederate States versus the
it's a diffuse population.
Yeah, and it's there's no concentrated point of power that are dictating the like top down initiatives or anything like that. So it's not like a civil war in the traditional sense, but there's a war happening where it's like a literal hot war. And to be projecting, I mean, not you, definitely not you, but the way that our media projects as if the war in Ukraine is like officially a war because there are nations involved, but what's happening in America is not a war because it's like a lone wolf here or there, and as if it's not like a culture war that's happening. That's just part of the media making people complicit in being the oppressed class that's under attack. And I think that's where it's like, it's really wild to watch a quote unquote Democratic president supporting a proxy war in Ukraine while the culture war at home claims many, many lives that don't need to have been lost. But whether it's like a police, I mean, not one, but a bunch of police officers shooting someone who was fleeing a traffic violation and then shooting them 60 times while at least 60 times while actual mass murderers get taken without incident. It's like, as a Black person, this is why I don't celebrate the 4th of July and shit like that, and why I'm like, yeah, I'm American, but there's nothing to fucking be proud of here.
So,
because
like, let's just assume that their firearms hold like 15 rounds. And if they hit every single shot, that's 60. That's four guns, fully loaded. Every shot hits.
they fired over 90 shots.
I know,
that's the problem. Yeah.
I know, that's the thing. That means that, like, you know, at least 2 people reloaded at least once. If there were 4, if there were 6 people, then there were 6 fucking people shooting at one person.
And then they handcuffed his fucking dead body.
Yeah.
This is where I'm like, there's some Nazi shit happening in this country that they are so busy deflecting to pointing at Ukraine and the war in Ukraine that they're like, it as a black person, it shouldn't take having to learn that a black person has been shot 60 times to convince anyone that there's a problem. But because people are so unwilling to see black people as actual human beings, they're not doing anything about it. And then they keep trying to put the onus on black people to like vote the problem away, as if black people ever voted to allow ourselves to be shot 60 times at a traffic stop, as if that was ever something that we like actively put on the table. And I think when you have a nation in which people are like, oh, critical race theory shouldn't be taught, but you should also teach both sides when it comes to World War II. These are unserious people. They know what they're doing. They're not trying to actually be logically consistent. And the left, or the Democrats and centrists in this country, keep trying to approach them as if they're using logical frameworks, and it keeps harming black people. It keeps harming trans people. It keeps harming gay people. And this is where I'm like, you know, obviously with the podcast, all we can do on here is talk about it. But the problem becomes when people aren't even willing to talk about it, as if like, here's another problem. Like Joe Biden is like finally starting to use his authority the way that it's meant to be used. And I'm not about to sit here and be like, he's fucking amazing now. And it's like, the issue is the one thing he's done so far that he should have done day one is like, that's the minimum he could have done. He could sign an executive order to do some shit about like police, and anytime that they're like caught killing someone, that the investigation is going to make it so like in this case where they just murdered someone with like 60 shots, no individual is going to get any single repercussion because too many bullets from too many guns were involved. So you can't nail it down to one person. So by proxy, nobody's going to get
I mean, the state police are supposed to investigate these things, and when it's beyond their purview, it's supposed to be handled by the FBI, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that shooting at anyone 90 times is excessive. There's only one person, right? It wasn't like he was 4 people or 10 people. It wasn't like a group that they shot at. It was one dude running for his life. There's got to be some kind of change. The culture needs to address this a different way. If someone's running for their life and fleeing in terror, like not fighting back, maybe there's a better way to, you know, apprehend the individual if that's the goal.
Well, the only better way is to legislate it so that they're not able to fucking do that shit.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be able to do that shit in the first place, because the problem is they've shown that they can exercise control and exercise strategy and techniques when it's a white fucking mass shooter. That's the way it should be with anybody. So it's like, it's not that they should be murdering white mass shooters. It's that they should be like collecting anyone who's meant to be under arrest without fucking murdering them. So they can do it when it's like when it's a white man. They've proven over and over and over again that if it's a white guy who just shot a bunch of kids, oh, he's going to be taken without incident. He's not going to get killed. They're actively, like, they asked with the Uvalde shooter, "Can I kill him?" And they didn't give a response. No, we're not gonna give a response. So it's like when you have a police force that is willing to just execute black guys for like selling loose cigarettes, and then Democrats are like, "Oh, we can't do anything about it unless you vote," and then the right wing just like goes in churches and goes in
Wait.
fucking grocery stores and murders people.
We won't do anything unless you vote. It sounds like holding someone hostage.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. And it's unfortunate that we've got the Nazis on the one side and then political terrorists on the other side holding our rights hostage and just making it seem like, oh, if you just let me stay in this position I've been in for like 30 fucking years, no, just pick one. Pick one.
So
They've been there for like 30 years.
Do they like flip a coin to decide who gets to be the Nazis and who gets to be the political terrorists for a season?
That's what it seems like, considering Jim Crow Joe used to work with the segregationists. That's what it kind of feels like. I mean, he didn't get the name Jim Crow Joe for like just out of nowhere. This dude worked. He proudly worked with segregationists. That's reaching across the aisle. So I'm just really like I'm fed up with Nazis being present and being justified as if like Nazis are acceptable. Like it's an unacceptable point of view in the sense of like we literally fought an entire fucking war because that's an unacceptable it's an unacceptable worldview as was decided by people before you or I were even born. So we shouldn't be having this conversation or even having this reiteration of exercising the demonic Nazis from our government and our institutions, because again, the World War II that we're so inundated with media about, they can't stop fucking making video games about. For fuck's sake, I do not need one more goddamn World War II video game. And it's not, I'm not playing them. I just don't even want to see them. I'm fucking tired. It's like we need to make a new video game. Well, do we have enough World War II video games yet? Nope, not yet. Here, EA, let's go make another fucking World War II shooter. Shoot them up. Just turning actual death and actual war into a fucking game. That's the great part about fiction is it's not based on like real events or like if I'm playing Cyberpunk 27, I'm not actually I'm never going to play that game. But if I was to play that game, at least it's not based on somebody's grandpa fucking dying, right?
I mean, have they worked out all the kinks yet?
I mean, probably not.
Well, I'm still not interested then, so.
And I know a lot of it was like with the previous generations, like a lot of the problems were that they were trying to make a game that shouldn't have been run on PlayStation 4s and Xbox Ones for previous generation systems, and it just was a shit show. And nobody should have ever been given the pretense that their systems were able to run that game and that they would trade money for an experience that was meant to be a fun game, because no one got that with a PlayStation 4. But that's where we've gotten to a point in capitalism where the idea I was told is that capitalism is meant to give a good or a service in exchange for payment, and that the supply is meant to meet the demand. And if the supply is in high demand, the price goes up in accordance to the supply being limited. And if they increase the supply, the price goes down in accordance to meeting the demand. Well, I was under the assumption that when you have that, everything is meant to work. Like if you pay for a good or service, it's meant to work. At some point in the 60s and probably late 50s, that wasn't like some douchebag in some boardroom somewhere was like, hey, let's take that part out of the equation and let's stop making stuff that works. And if they buy it, that's on them for not doing their fucking research. And ever since, I don't know what douchebag it was. We can't pinpoint it to one person. But ever since that culture emerged, buyer beware. And it's like caveat emptor always, obviously. But there was an actual time where, because of the laws and because of the culture, you could buy like a washing machine and it would have like a lifetime warranty, or you could buy a telephone and it has a lifetime warranty because the thing that they gave you was actually going to work as long as you used it the way it was meant to be used. Like if you went and set your phone on fire, well, that's outside of the warranty, because
So
that's not.
speaking of old telephones, and these are rare nowadays, the old rotary Bell Labs or American Bell telephones. These are the kind that like have a cord that has a curly Q action to it. Yeah.
They probably still all work.
Well, those things were incredible because they contained microphone preamp circuitry and emphasis, re-emphasis, de-emphasis equalization in the earpiece, and on both ends. And what it allowed for was nearly noiseless transmission of audio signal across, the entire fucking country, almost instantaneously, at the speed of electricity. And it was crystal clear. I mean, if you remember talking to like your grandpa or your grandma or an aunt or an uncle or somebody across the country during the rotary phone days, not the early push button, but still when rotary phones were around, like there's this sound that doesn't really exist anymore. Our cell phones don't do this. Our cell phones are very accurate. They can do noise filtering and computational audio, like ubiquitous microphone technology. It's really cool stuff. Creating a stereo field from an object that's only 4.5 inches long. That's really fucking impressive. And they sound better reproducing music than some boomboxes did 30 years ago. Or not boomboxes, like little handheld radio things. Anyways, if you can find one of these things, and there are adapters to connect them to like Google Voice or modern VoIP systems, I highly recommend you buy that fucking thing, even if it's like $50. If it still works, and it probably does, because they were made with, the circuits on those old machines were extremely large compared to what they are today. Like modern circuits are very tiny. They're basically traces that provide resistance for that length of the circuit. It's really incredible. Circuit design today is just absolutely incredible. But in the early days of all this stuff, that they could mass produce them, but because the techniques and the metal processes that they used weren't quite as refined, they used bigger circuits, and the components, the electrical components themselves, were larger because they had to be, because they just didn't have the manufacturing processes down. And these phones, when you listen to them, like it's amazing. You can just hear somebody. It's almost like they're right next to you. And they probably still work. Like 100 years later. Or no, like 60, 80, 70 years later.
Well, I just remember when I was a kid, the phone, like a lot of those rotary phones that I was using were like already 30 and 40 years old.
Yeah.
And it was like they would work all throughout my childhood as if, that's just a phone that exists. As long as it's plugged in, it's going to work.
Yeah.
It's almost nothing except a direct electric shock, like a overload on that system.
Old power,
while the phone was
they had their own power too. They supplied their own power. They were like independent from the electrical grid. It was so cool. That stuff was,
which is where again it would only have electrical problems if someone was actively using it.
Yeah.
And there was like a overload while someone was on the phone.
The old wired telephone system was hardened against nuclear attack. I'm serious. This is like a nationalized infrastructure that they took away from us to give us privatized data. It wasn't fast enough. It was barely fast enough for dial-up, obviously. But
and it's the same thing with wireless. There's whole bands that only military and government are using, just so none of the shit that we do interferes with it.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously those won't be impervious to nuclear attacks, but that's where they probably have the wired as the backup.
Do you remember, like, in the early days of interneting, when it was still like 99% text, and you had to wait a few minutes for an image to load, when it was still like modems and not, there was no ISDN available yet, no T3 lines, no T1 lines, and I still remember pages with text loading relatively easily, and just waiting for the image, and I don't think that I have perceived an increase in actual speed of being able to read text.
Because the pages weren't overloaded.
Exactly.
Then, so it was like it was only built to accommodate what the download speed was.
They've really increased the bandwidth. They've given us bigger tubes so we can have more commercials and faster video commercials and faster music with commercials.
Basically, flashier logos.
Flashy logos.
More high definition porn.
3-dimensional or 3D VR porn.
That's like, so we're getting to a point where I think it was like the last I saw, like 30% of internet users are bots, and then something like 50 or 60% of internet surfing is used for pornography. So it's like, that's all it was ever really meant for in the first place. You can only do so much digitally, and most of that stuff that you're doing online digitally is luxury or casual because of the upload download restrictions. So that's why, like, if somebody was doing video editing, they weren't doing it online, they were doing it locally, just because it's a shitload to output locally, let alone if you're talking about uploading 4 gigs on one draft of some shit. And it's like, that's just one video that's probably like 30 minutes long if it's 4K, maybe an hour. Like, so things like Pixar, when they had to go remote, it wasn't that they were never able to go remote, but they being forced to go remote, they probably realized that there are easier ways to do things. Like, for example, if I was going to send a draft to somebody, it'd probably be easier for me to physically mail them a hard drive than try to upload it and then have them download it. Like, no matter, because of the way that upload and download speeds get throttled, even with gig internet speed, like the size of a video like file that they're working with, when we're talking about the scale of a company like Pixar, yeah, there's probably cases where it was literally easier to move hard drives than upload and download. And it sounds crazy in 2022, but it's just a matter of when you have higher quality textures on your images, that just takes up more space. And according in the same scale that our computers are able to hold more storage, the textures and resolutions they're able to output are higher and higher, which takes up even more space. So we have like the people who are making 8K resolution models that then get downscaled to 4K that go on DVD, their shit has to be super powerful compared to what normal people have. And then normal people have problems like downloading videos. Just imagine if you're trying to download or upload the actual file that contains all the information for that video that regular people having a problem downloading.
Yeah, the collection of all media for the project itself, all like 67 gigabytes for that 4 gigabyte.
67, 200 terabyte
Yeah,
You know, like
well, I imagine Pixar has it stored on some really advanced serial attached storage network that has like dozens of nodes that are all replicating against each other that are lightning fast.
yeah, I
Just
bet
I
they
mean
do have a
in their
crazy cloud
yeah at their render
at their
facility.
yeah. I know they do have a crazy render farm that's like remote GPU accessible. So that's
Yeah.
like they do allow
Yeah, render
they have
farm.
remote they have remote render farming, which allows it, but that place has to be localized somewhere.
Man, I remember I saw this documentary about Pixar when they built like a cluster computer, a rendering cluster out of Mac Minis, and it was the coolest fucking computer because they put little spacers in between them with fans, and so it didn't even look like Mac Minis. It looked like this, a future computer from a science fiction movie. It looked like the engine of a starship. It was incredible looking from one side because the other side had all the cables coming out of it. But the kind of computing that is done at that level, I don't think that it's even comprehensible to the average computer user. I mean, just
God, no.
getting a cluster of computers to communicate with each other. Well, it's a lot easier now than it was because a lot of software now is designed to offload resources, or offload portions of projects to utilize resources of other computers that are networked with each other, as long as they're running, the right license for that software package, which is pretty lucrative for the software developers.
Well, and it's like most people need computing power to have 200 tabs.
That's funny.
You know what I mean? That's why people really in modern times need computing power in their minds.
Man, I feel it's my browser is getting. Well, let's see, how does this work? When I start getting beyond like 6 to 9 tabs, I take my search tab into a new window and start building new searches. I don't leave them all in one browser because typically my tabs are kind of like a chain of searches or a chain of inquiry, and at some point they start becoming different things. Maybe that's just my own organizational system.
Well,
But I've never been able to understand like
here's the
million
thing.
tabs
I'm
across
not-
the thing because I can't tell what's in them, and I'm using big monitors too.
Yeah, well, and that's where there's the time it crosses over between being an organizational system and being tab hoarding is when you stop knowing what's in the tabs. And that's where it's like,
Yeah.
I keep, like you said, but if it goes beyond like 5, I'll open up a new window to collect that group, but I don't use more than 2 groups. And if it gets more than like 9, then I'll do like a tab cleaning
Oh yeah.
ever so often. But the issue is like once you start being at a point where you don't even know what they're open for, and then you go look at something like, why did I even look at this? That's tab hoarding. And I think the problem becomes tab hoarding makes people feel like they're doing work when in reality it's just like ADD manifested into Windows and into a browser. And it's like there is there's a difference between keeping track for the sake of one's long-term memory and keeping notes, but the way so what I've also learned is like you can create tab groups. So I've like started to create groups of tabs so it like consolidates it down, and if I need to go to that tab group, I just click on it and it opens up that group. And that's like a very useful function, but it's also helped me gain a lot of direction in how I use my tabs. And that's where the more people let themselves collect like hoard tabs with the delusion that they're doing work, the more it drifts into like working against them. And that's kind of where like I know my work has been a lot more streamlined by reducing the number of tabs I have open at any given time, but also actively grouping the tabs and then like continuously culling them to make sure I'm not like right now I have 6 tabs open in one, and like
Right now, I've got in
one of them.
one machine, I've got 3 browsers, each with 1 tab, and they're all essentially open into an administrative console. And in another computer, I've got 6 tabs open, 5 of which are 4 of which are related to a search query, and the last is also related to a similar search query.
Well, and then I look on the entertainment machine and I have 10 open, and they're all meant to keep track of like, oh, I go back to this thing frequently, so I just keep it open instead of closing it. But that's where once it gets past 10, it really starts to become difficult to navigate for anybody. I don't care who you are. And it's like,
Do you
it's like
open up
this
the windows
weird-
in like 5 distinct sections in two rows, 5 columns, 2 rows, so you can watch all 10 or see all 10 at the same time?
Oh God, no. I mean, there's
some
there's
news center
times
action.
where like I'll put on like on the same screen, I'll put on 2 feeds because it's like a big enough screen to watch 2 things on the same screen. Like if there's 2 sets of fights happening at once and neither fight is particularly interesting, like yeah, I'll put both of them on at the same time, just to then be like, okay, this card is more interesting, I'll go to this one. But that's where like I've been looking at the picture in picture, and I feel like that's another delusion of multitasking where it's like, yeah, you really can only watch one thing at a time and give it your attention. You can have 2 screens open at once, but you can really only give one your visual attention at any given time. And there's all these things about like not even about selling stuff so much as the presentation that some work is being done, or there's something being done of importance. So it's like, oh, I need these like 3 screens because I'm like monitoring these other things while I watch TV. So it's like I'm still doing work even though I'm like, you know, playing on this other screen, but there is the capacity to monitor multiple things like visually and auditorily, where you're doing one thing visually and one thing auditorily, then another thing haptically. So it's not that it's impossible, more so as the way that we've been trained to not allow ourselves any free time, then we're always occupying one of these channels with something that's meant to appear as if we're working. And that's like, I think the byproduct of the notion of like, you got to be multitasking. You can't, you know, idle hands are the tools of the devil and all this shit. And it's like, there's these weird Protestant like practices that seep into our culture that it seems like they're coming from nowhere, but it's really like feudalist Protestantism trying to sap every working minute out of people that it possibly can.
Man, the schedule just binds you to future where you don't have time.
Yep, you never have time to yourself, man. It literally puts you in a spot where your future is 2 weeks out determined for most people's jobs, but they're also working on 2 weeks credit for that same fucking job. So you've got a deficit of 2 weeks time at most given times, while you're also working on a deficit of 2 weeks labor, which is fucking insane. That's you're basically like a month behind at any given time, which is just enough time to keep people from like figuring out how to move into a better position, really. I mean, not to say that you can do it in a month, but if I can take away, like, if somebody's able to sit for a month and really think, like, what do I want to do with my life to figure out where I want to go to make my situation better, and they really get some time to do some research and like get some time just to chill, like, because if somebody chills out for like a week, they'll get bored just sitting there and playing video games and shit. Like, they'll want to like do something else after a while. So it's like giving people time off is it's meant to be a recharge and a morale booster, but the way that our culture presents it, as it's as if like people will just like never ever come back ever again if you just like give them a taste of a break or give them a taste of a vacation.
Well, that's why people say they need a vacation from their vacation. They come back after
Right.
going hard because
Yeah.
they've got all this pent up energy, and you get home, and you're like, I can't move. I'm beat. I need to relax. Although I'm sure that some people just go to a beach and relax for their vacations, and kudos to them because I can't do that.
Well, you can only do it so long before getting sun poisoning.
Yeah.
Like, you literally can't chill out at a beach forever because you will get a heat stroke or you will get sun poisoning. So you just can't fucking do it. You just can't even physically do that.
You know, I was in Mexico one time for a few days, and I remember going out into this. I went to go walk into the ocean, and you know, it took me forever just to get up to my waist. But it was so nice, but it was so hot. I don't think I could be outside in that kind of climate for long. I could, but I'd be really uncomfortable after a while.
It is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable as fuck.
I mean, it's uncomfortable here in peak sunlight during high pressure, humidity, and all that, and we got heat wave action. But
You ever try to eat on a beach on a windy day?
no, because I don't like sand in my teeth.
Yeah, it fucking sucks. It's damn near impossible. It's damn near impossible. So beaches are great in theory. They're really great in theory, but you can't hang out there for too long and like not come to the conclusion, okay, I need to not be at a beach and not have fucking sand in places that like
Sand
I didn't
shouldn't
know
be.
sand could get into.
How did that even
So,
get there?
Yeah.
That's-
Like how? And that's why beaches are like I said, they're great in theory,
yeah.
and it's like all vacation are way better in theory than in application. And I think a lot of it comes down to when you go on these vacations, the space has been curated for luxury and for relaxation, but people don't curate their own spaces. So they're actually like really enjoying the space curation, but associating it with the vacation aspect. And that's like the reason I come to that conclusion is when I go to a space that hasn't been as well curated as my own, I'm like, I'd rather be at home than this place. And that's where it makes me think that the people who are constantly not wanting to be at their own place just either don't know how to curate their space or don't want to curate their space. Because it's like the way that Block Party when you're a kid has curated this. I mean, another thing we were talking about this last night is like arcades used to be for adults. And the funny thing is, the reason they stopped being focused on adults is not because video games are inherently childish. It's because the kids started beating the adults and adults couldn't handle that shit. And then they fucking made it seem as if arcade culture wasn't actually for adults in the first place. And now it's childish shit. And then you see movies like, what was it? The one with Fred Savage. I think it was The Wizard.
Oh, is that the one where you had to play Mario 3?
Yeah, but movies like that started coming out and making war games preceded that, but there were there was like a cultural shift where Tron, like Tron is clearly adults playing video games. Last Starfighter, clearly adults playing video games. Um, so it's weird to have been alive during the time when it's shifting from
That's right. At one point, the fate of the
video
galaxy
game.
was entrusted to a young man who was
Right.
unsure of
Yeah,
what
yeah,
he
it
was going
wasn't
to
a
do with
kid.
himself. He wasn't like he was kind of
No, it
aimless,
wasn't a kid.
but he had a
was like college
job.
age.
He had a, but he,
It's about, yep, it was not a kid.
it was not a, it was not
And
some teenager. It wasn't
the
some.
the thing that you see in both Tron and The Last Starfighter is like people gathered around watching him play. That shit used to happen. So it's like knowing the way arcade culture existed because I was there and I grew up in it, and seeing it transition and why it transitioned being rewritten through media. It's funny because I'm like, it only dawned on me yesterday as to why it actually happened.
Seriously,
But
I
the
remember being
media,
at arcades hearing someone announce, "Holy crap! They're at the final boss of such and such machine," and people would leave the
yeah,
console
that's the
that they
way it
had
used to
like
be.
put money into, and
Yeah,
because they
dude.
were nowhere near the final boss. But here's this person at the final boss of some machine that we all know takes like $5 minimum just to get to, and they're fucking rocking that shit. That's athletic level video
Because,
gaming.
well, the problem is it's really hard to remember, but video games were so expensive that it was a like a prohibitive activity that kids couldn't do unless their parents were rich or willing to let them waste quote unquote money, because at the time there was no prospect of being a Twitch streamer that just makes money off of fucking sponsorships playing video games. That wasn't even remotely viable as a career, which is why movies like The Wizard existed, because that shit was like just starting in the late 80s where they would have the game tournaments, and it would be a huge fucking deal. So it's really crazy to see history be rewritten as if like video games were always for kids, because they definitely weren't always for kids. But a lot of it has to do, I think, with the right wing trying to make it seem as if like video games, well, they did this shit with music and Dungeons and Dragons shit too. The satanic panic and making it seem as if media is the root of violence or the root of evil in society. Um, and then the emergence of the ESRB, where games didn't used to have ratings on them like movies, and they started. I think that's not a bad concept, but the way it applied, they weren't really enforcing it, so kids were still able to get like games they shouldn't have been playing. So it's like, man, as an adult, do I think a kid should be playing Grand Theft Auto? Fuck no, of course not. But the issue is, when I was a kid, all the games were behind a counter when I went to buy them. So if I wanted to buy something, the person, like, you had the sheet on the aisle, and you like referenced the game or whatever, and they would go pick it up. And if it was like a game that kids shouldn't be playing, the person would be like, yeah, you'd have to have your parent. Like if it was suggested for adults only, I think like Seventh Guest or some shit might have had a warning. There's a few games that had warnings, like Duke Nukem 3D, shit like that.
I thought that was like a seizure warning.
Well, I know Duke Nukem 3D had like I think that was like a download
Oh,
mostly anyway. But it's like there were some games that definitely were like, kids shouldn't be. I think they had like a kids shouldn't be playing this too.
Well,
If I'm
Duke
if I'm
Nukem
saying, but
had poorly rendered titties.
yeah, it
So
had like strippers.
and that was like they weren't even rendered as well as the titties in Grand Theft Auto. So
No, but it's at the time that was like as good as they could have gotten, and you know what they were. You could tell what they were, so it was like, yeah, it's vulgar and obscene enough.
it's good enough. It's good enough for rock and roll at the time.
Yeah.
So I was reading about, to change the subject, I was reading about carbon output and how the new frontier of reducing pollution within automobiles is actually in tire compounds. Because it turns out that tire compounds put out somewhere in the order of 1,800 times the amount of carbon that the tailpipes of your average automobile does. And as the weight of the vehicle goes up and the size of the tires increase, so does the amount of carbon output. So it turns out that while gasoline vehicles do put out some emissions, it's not to say that there aren't any. Over the life of a vehicle, the one constant is the tires. The older they get, the more they put out little particles, and the more carbon dioxide it puts into the atmosphere. Currently, there are no other alternatives to the current tire compounds that we have. They all do this. They all have the similar behavior, and so it doesn't matter if it's a diesel or gas or electric or hybrid or whatever. They're all producing fine particulate matter that's ending up in our atmosphere and in our water, and this is the new frontier because we're on a path with electric vehicles. We're on a path to reducing and limiting and eventually phasing out internal combustion. But the tires, 1,800 times the carbon output versus the tailpipe. On the low end, they only produce 72% of the carbon output for a vehicle for a year. On the low end, and that's like minimal driving. Aggressive driving, it's like an order of magnitude more carbon output. And then brake pads, all these things. So, yeah.
Well, and it's like there's the possibility that they can move towards more vegetable-based sources.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a graphene-based tire compound that's on the horizon, but graphene is expensive to manufacture.
Right, which is why using more vegetable or renewable-based sources would be more optimal.
Yeah. Well, I think I think that you're right. I think that we have to figure out a way to create, the tires in such a way that they're a part of the carbon cycle again, instead of being a part of the petroleum to carbon cycle, which is pretty much a one-way path, because it takes millions of years for petroleum products to start forming again. We can't just put them in a spot and hope that they just turn back into oil. But if we have a tire that is rapidly biodegradable with certain conditions and can return back into the carbon cycle easily, we might have a solution. But unfortunately, it's like an eraser. You rub it on the paper to get rid of the pencil marks, and no matter what, that stuff has to go somewhere. And some of it's retained in the eraser, but a lot of it and some of the eraser is left on the paper to be wiped away. And so until our rubber compounds don't have this behavior, which is probably never going to happen, we're just waiting on science to solve this problem.
That's crazy. I mean, there's just so many things that we need to fix concerning the climate crisis and how to address it, but that's just another one where it's like, ah, damn, I didn't think it was like that bad, but damn, that makes sense,
Well,
you
electric
know?
vehicles are even worse of a contributor to this because they weigh more.
Right, right.
So I mean, they have the weight of a full-size truck, and then they're using uh, high high adhesion rubber compounds because they are high performance vehicles, and those tires will definitely wear out. These are it's a horrible quandary. We've got to reduce the weight of the battery. The total mass of the battery has to come down so that there's not as much mass, sprung mass on the tires that are going to be eaten away. You know, it's the kind of thing that makes me wonder how long before climate crisis is fully acknowledged and the countdown to climate catastrophe, you know, because I think once the general population, because I think we're finally at a point where people accept the term climate change, but climate crisis is like that's an escalation of threat as far as I'm concerned, and I think that we're absolutely in a state of climate crisis.
Well, and then it's like, as individuals, there are things we can do to like make a change in our own impact, but it's limited. And it's like, we can't be expected to bear the brunt of the weight of the change when we're not the ones who have the brunt of the impact. But obviously, it's like, yeah, individuals can change their behaviors, but I think it is like the same way that people put pressure on Biden to do an executive order about Roe versus Wade. It's like, that's the same kind of pressure we need to be putting on him to like do an executive order about ending uh, fossil fuel dependence, or how much oil companies can make in profit. Because if it's not profitable, then they won't fucking keep doing it. And that's where it's like, oh, they're not digging oil for the sake of humanity. They're not making sure, oh, we would just want to make sure humanity has energy. That's not why they're fucking doing it. So if we just make it so that, yeah, if you want to dig oil, drill for oil, then you have to be doing it for humanity's like, it has to be under certain non-destructive conditions where it's like that doesn't really exist, so it's basically going to end it. But if the conditions were such that you had to ensure that you're not destroying any ecosystem while you're doing it, then most companies aren't going to be able to qualify, and by proxy, it's not going to be profitable, and they're not going to continue to do it. So they can just move on to some other fucking industry where they're just trying to exploit a profit margin. And that's where I'm like, it shouldn't be radical to think that everything shouldn't be subject to profit margins. Like, you can have some things subject to profit margins. I'm not saying everything can't have a profit. That's not even like feasible. But
Yeah, people deserve to be compensated. Their efforts deserve to be valued. Their contributions should be recognized. All of these things, just not at a level where it's parasitic or detrimental to the homeostasis of the economy. Really.
right.
And I was reading about how over the course of the last, oh no, is the Pueblo civilization, and over the course of their civilization, they had several economic collapses, like societal collapses, which required pretty dramatic modification of their culture. They, at one point, you know, they lived in large groups and they were surrounded with farmlands. And then next thing you know, they have cliff dwellings, and it's presumed that there was, you know, severe weather or difficulty with farming. There's a lot of research that indicates why these things happen, but they all kind of center around the same thing. From the records that have been explored, they've determined that each one of these collapses was preceded by like drastic inequality of wealth and access to resources, and the economic collapse that led to the societal collapse, they just would pit people against each other. A lot of these the communities, cities, they collapsed on themselves because wealth inequality, resource inequality. And this is consistent with other failed civilizations or societies throughout all of human history. This isn't just like a Pueblo thing. It's happened in China. It's happened in Russia. It's happened all over Europe. It's probably happened all over Africa. It's probably happened all over portions of Australia too, where there are people, because there are definitely portions where there are no people. Like, so this isn't like an old condition that we're experiencing. These people who want to, take advantage have always been around. Maybe they're the reason caveat emptor exists. Of course.
For sure.
And of course, if no one learns even like just the maxims of Latin, the colloquialisms that we should know. Like, I mean, semper fi is all over the place. I see it on the back of people's SUVs all over the place. So, there is a little bit of Latin, the vestigial Latin left over in American English.
So on that note, there was a DoorDash glitch that
I read about that.
appeared to allow people to order anything that they wanted for free, and many people exploited, or so they thought, this glitch. Ordered thousands of dollars worth of alcohol in some cases. Some people ordered $1,000 worth of food. Well, at least one person ordered $17,000 worth of various types of alcohols. Well, it turns out that it wasn't as much of a benefit as they thought, because DoorDash has now hit all of those people's bank accounts, and they're negative whatever they thought that they were getting for free. So one person has a bank account that is negative $17,000 because DoorDash is definitely going to get their money back one way or another, even though that person thought that they were getting one over. So it's interesting to see like how caveat emptor works, in the sense of like, yeah, buyer beware, because you think you're getting a deal, but you're actually fucking yourself. It looks like anything that looks too good to be true probably is the saying.
Yeah. If it looks too good to be true, you're probably going to meet some really big dudes later. No.
But turns out, well, this is where, again, the idea that if somebody can exploit something that, they should just go ahead. Like, I lost my debit card and somebody fucking found it and immediately tries to buy a fucking gun, apparently. So I'm like, I had to cancel that card. Luckily, it got refunded. But it's like Americans are so without that as soon as they think that they this is my opportunity to get a leg up, they go to exploit it. And it's like, man, the way that all those people went and quote unquote exploited that DoorDash glitch, instead of just leaving it alone, like now their bank accounts are negative in some cases, where it's like, if you would have just left it alone, it'd been all right. Nothing, you thought you were getting one up, and then you're buying some shit you don't need anyway. And it's like the idea that all these people weren't going to buy anything, but when they thought they could get some shit for free, then they go spend $1,000 on some shit that they know that they didn't need. But when they thought they could get it free, they're just gonna do it because they've never, in many cases, had the chance to just like go splurge. And that's where I'm like, it's wild to see conditioning play out where if you like keep people without and then you show them all these people with and you continuously, oh, look at Kim Kardashian, she's on her 16th fucking house and she's wearing Marilyn Monroe's dress, and what do you have, you dipshit? You ain't got shit. And she just did this by being in a porno. What are you doing? You're doing nothing, just working at your fucking normal job. You're a loser. And it's like constantly inundated with this
speaking
shit.
of the Kardashians, I think it's time we all acknowledge that they're just like the bougiest preppers. Like, seriously. No, I'm fucking serious. Like, they've got pantries stocked with the nicest stuff, and not just like one of something or two or three or four, but like an entire shelf, like multiple cases of fucking Cholula hot sauce, the same flavor of hot sauce, not even like a selection. Like, that's some fucking end times prepper shit.
They're just hoarders that don't smell like hoarders. That's all.
They just smell like fancy hoarders. They still smell like hoarders. They're just really, really, really bougie hoarders.
Fancy hoarders.
Yeah. Yeah, but they've got they've got pantries the size of some small grocery stores, like corner markets. That's nuts. Freaking basement that holds 6 cars turned into a fucking pantry. What the?
Well, and it's like the only reason I went off on this rant is because I was the other day I like got a couple video games from Steam, and I'm like, at some point I'm like, man, I have there's times when you want to play certain things and then you may not have that game, so you need to get a new game. But that's where I'm like, I don't need any new games, and this is a completely frivolous activity, but I'm doing it anyway. So I'm like buying games that I just want to play, even though I have other games that I know are that same type of game. If I just want to play a hack and slasher or play a fighting game, I have a fighting game, but I want a new one. I want a novel one because I want something different. And being aware of this like desire for novelty, it's like, well, I'll find something on sale. I'm not going to buy something that's necessarily like $60 because I want something new. So I found some shit that's like on sale for 80% off. So understanding my own needs makes it a lot easier for me to be like, oh, just because I want a new game doesn't mean I have to pay quote unquote a new game price. And then I still get the same satisfaction of having bought a new game and gotten in something new visually and something new haptically without paying 60 or 70 fucking dollars or whatever. Not to say that it's not, most of them aren't worth it, but not to say that some games can't be worth that, but most of them generally aren't, which is why I don't want to pay that, because I've been burned too many fucking times buying a game that isn't ready at launch because they're willing to sell you a fucking game that's not finished. So knowing that, I'm not willing to pay for new games to get burned to be their beta testers. And knowing that is where I'm like walking this line between the desire to play something new with the also understanding that a game company will sell me a fucking broken game at full game price. So those two things are constantly at odds, and I can't waste money. So then there comes a point where I'm like, I have all of the working functional games that I want because I bought one game and it wasn't functioning and I had to return it, and playing it was so frustrating that it reminded me why I don't buy new games again. And it's where this cycle of like buying new shit, getting burned, and you either learn why you don't buy new shit or you keep continuing to buy new shit that doesn't work in this. And it's like a lot of Americans continue to buy shit that doesn't work with the expectation, oh, the next new thing I'll buy will work because it's new, when in reality, there's no impetus to deliver a working product anymore. Whatever happened, they don't need to deliver working shit. So that's where I realized if I have all the working shit that I need in my home, I like went out looking for stuff to buy, and I couldn't find anything to buy because I didn't even like I didn't need anything, but there wasn't anything with the prospect of adding anything of value to my life that I could guarantee would be working and it wouldn't break immediately after trying to use it. And I'm like, man, this is a weird place to be in, to be like at Best Buy or at Target and not only I don't need anything, but I don't even want anything in here. Like, I don't want any of this shit. And it was like this weird place to be where I'm like, I don't know if anybody could actually get here without buying millions of dollars worth of stuff, but it was like a weird. I don't think the weight was there, but it was like me realizing that weight of desiring novel shit and buying that novel shit was no longer there, because I can make it. If I want something novel, I can like do it enough out of my own skill set to where like now I can sculpt it, I can like build it, I can draw it, I can 3D model it, whatever I need to do. It's like buying it is just going to be an inferior version of what I can actually make. So there's no actual desire to buy something and fill my home with like inferior shit. And I don't know if Americans can get there without, like, you can't buy your way there. That's the issue, is like you have to actually be able to build your way to that point. But I don't know if enough Americans are willing to like learn how to build a computer or learn how to like put together an action figure or some shit like that, where it's like, man, you don't have to build everything, but once you learn how to build enough, a lot of the shit that you can buy is not enough, is not of high enough standard to give you the actual physical or mental impetus or desire to buy it. And I know you're there on a lot of things, but it's like putting it into like, I don't know how many Americans could walk around a mall and not actually want anything. And be able to honestly say like, I don't want anything. Because the thing is, if you want something and you can't buy it, there's a difference between that and being able to buy something and not wanting it. Because that's where I was like, man, there's like not really anything that I can't buy in this place, but I don't want any of it. Like, none of it is like, I don't fucking need any of it, and I don't want any of it. Like, all this shit, like
it's really fulfilling
Funko
when you're
Pops. I mean, again, it's like nothing against Funko Pops, but I walked in and there's so many Funko Pops. I'm like, I cannot even imagine a place to put any of this shit where I would if like this, it looks like junk sitting on these shelves to me. And that's where I'm like, the petroleum companies have convinced Americans to like buy their byproducts in the form of junk and decorate their homes with fucking petroleum byproducts. And that's like how it looks anymore. It looks like I'm just like looking at petroleum company byproducts that they're trying to hawk, as if I want their fucking like it's their trash that they're trying to sell me.
Man, the last time I was in a mall, it's because I was buying a brush for Sheila and some hair clips. for her stocking for Christmas. Because that's the kind of thing I get her every year. I get her hairbrush and some clips. Among other things, but that's really the only reason I go to the mall. I can't. Mall food has never been good. Actually, that's not true. I went to a Korean mall one time in Delaware, Delaware, and the food was all right. But it was definitely not like a Western mall. And I've been to some open air markets that are kind of like big malls, but really they're not.
All food just tricks you into thinking it's good because it oversaturates your palate with sodium and sugar.
And brand loyalty.
Yeah, and that's where there's this element of like there's all these brain tricks happening that make mall food seem way better than it actually is.
Also,
and that's kind of like
you're on display. Eating at a mall, if you eat at the food court, everyone walks by. They're just like looking in there and thinking, I wonder what that smell is. You gotta pay to eat lunch so you can be one of the zoo attractions at the mall.
Yeah, really. If all of those places that are in a mall generally were on their own, they wouldn't be getting patrons.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Well, I think a mall serves a reasonable purpose for like teenagers. It's somewhat safe, right? There's security. Can't really get away with too much in a mall. Cameras everywhere. They walk around, do what teenagers do. I don't know what teenagers do. Maybe that's like an old model. I don't even know what the demographic of mall users even looks like anymore. Mall users, patrons, mall patrons. Users sounds like they have to sign in.
Bunch of people with no masks is what it was yesterday. Yeah, that's where I quickly ended that trip because I went there for milk and there was like a couple other things I went in for, but I like wandered into the mall just to see like what was there. And yeah, there was a ton of people without masks.
Man, it's like the strangest fucking department store. It's like a super department store that doesn't want to just be called Sears. But then they've got 12 different shoe departments and 3 video game departments and 5 food departments, and none of them are next to each other. Those are just random numbers that I pulled out. There's probably more of clothing options. And I know that most of the food options are right next to each other.
Well, it seems as if the way that malls were designed, it was meant to be like the experience of being on Amazon in 2022, but they didn't have the internet yet. So like the closest thing they could do is like put a bunch of stores in close proximity to each other, and then put a Victoria's Secret there. So it's like,
wow, it's the internet of the 80s. It's Amazon on the internet in the 80s.
And then you got the sex toys and Spencer's. So there's like these little corners of it that it's like, you know, these little adult places, but you really have to like wander into them to get there. So,
and if you're not careful, you end up in like Lazarus or Macy's, and you're surrounded by giant sail-sized underwear. And by sail, I mean like sailboat.
then even down to like the way that anytime you walk into a department store, the perfume desks are like right by the door, so you have to walk walk through those people to get into the rest of the store, into the rest of the mall.
Just
It's
thinking
like
about
this
that
big.
makes my nose burn.
Oh yeah, for sure. My nose is burning too, just thinking about it. But it's like the same thing as like the pop-up windows and shit. Like,
all the kiosks, those kiosks with their flashing lights. Those
you have to
those are
click
also
X on
pop-ups.
people.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, I don't want your lotion. No, I don't want your sunglasses.
But I'll take 4 or 5 of those cookies.
Right. Oh shit. The fucking pretzel shop got me.
Oh yeah. Well, they've got special salt and the right kind of mustard, so it's like it's a trap.
It does, obviously bazaars and like mercantile like markets where people come to a place it's not like,
Well, the Silk Road in China is a mall, so
right, yeah, basically.
I mean the part that ends in like Beijing, I mean, it is a mall. So, and many locations along the Silk Road are malls.
So that notion obviously has a ton of history behind it, but trying to like then nail it down into a specific building, I think it's not like malls are going to go away, but the turnover of businesses within malls has gotten quicker and quicker, so that it becomes more difficult to operate in that type of setting unless you're like I think the smaller stores probably have a better capacity.
31 years ago when we moved to Bloomington, I remember going to the college mall because they had an Aladdin's Castle and I wanted to play some video games. And so I have very clear memories of wandering around that place as, a 10-year-old, and found myself every time I go back there, I think, man, this place hasn't changed one bit. Even though they've carved out a new Target and added a food court and added a whole new wing and changed a few things, and some of the big shops are gone and they've been replaced with other things. The mall still feels like the 90s to me. It's weird.
And most of it is the 90s. Like, they probably haven't changed. There's very little in that mall that's probably actually changed since the 90s.
Yeah, and when they did add the additions, they retrofitted to make them look like the rest of the mall.
Yeah, like Circle Center doesn't look 90s at all.
No, Circle Center looks like
2000s.
Yeah, it looks like maybe the future of the late 90s, but
right.
Circle Center was awesome though because they had a Sega City where they had the mech pods.
Oh yeah.
And you could get on, like, every racing game was a car, or they had flying games that had cockpits. They had motorcycle games with motorcycles. Like, all of the interfaces were the object that you were controlling inside the game. It wasn't like a joystick and buttons, or it wasn't anything like it. It was great. They failed, right? They lost out and they were replaced with something else, right? Or are they still there?
I haven't been to the arcade there in a while.
Yeah.
I would imagine there's probably something there, where there's like a Dave and Buster's or Sega City.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Dave and Buster's.
That's right. There are some bars that have video games.
Well, their whole establishments, there used to be Block Party, but they still have, Dave and Buster's is proof of that leftover adult arcade culture.
Yeah.
Because even there, they make it like exclusively for adults, so kids can't come in there and beat the adults.
Plus, they serve alcohol.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that's why they make it. We serve alcohol so you kids can't come. Well, you just don't want to lose.
A drunk person losing at Street Fighter to a teenager.
Nah,
hopped up
you're
on
on a
soda.
date. You're on a date with your girl and some fucking 12-year-old whoops your ass. Nah. Too many teenagers would be getting beat up by some drunk dude who's way too old to be playing the video game he was playing.
It's like when your center of mass has shifted sufficiently down that you no longer can operate the motorcycle controller properly. It's time to get off the horse.
Do you remember Daytona USA?
Oh yeah.
When that would be something that people would go in groups to play because it was like an event.
Yeah.
Because you were all sitting in your cars, like everybody could see the screens.
And then there's this big screen at the top.
Right. And you might as well have been like actually going to go-kart racing or some shit because like people would I think it maybe cost like $5 per race or something.
Yeah.
It was not cheap. It was either $2 or $5.
Well, there's another one I think that has the IndyCar style, the open wheel. I mean, it was like maybe it was Indy 500. I just remember there were a bunch of really good racing games for a while, and they all relied on sitting in a chair. Like they just weren't the same with the controller, no matter what.
Cruising USA,
yeah,
Ridge
and like
Racer.
the best versions of them were always at the arcade because they had a chair.
Cruising USA was a lot of fun.
Cruising USA was great fun because it was so absurd. You had like you have a Corvette with off-road wheels. You have a bread truck that can corner like a Corvette.
That game was ridiculous and how fun it was. I definitely spent a lot of quarters on that at the movie theater.
You know, I think I spent more time laughing while playing Cruising USA than I've spent like laughing playing any other car game. I can definitely guarantee that I've spent more time cursing while playing Gran Turismo than any other game, or any other racing game for that matter, car driving game, whatever. And I've definitely spent more time talking shit while playing Twisted Metal.
Well, and let's not forget Crazy Taxi.
Dude, Crazy Taxi is amazing. But that was more like I was just yelling at tunes on the screen for not getting out of my way fast enough.
There was some Simpsons driving game.
That was basically Crazy Taxi with Simpsons, though.
Yeah.
There was a heist game called Driver, where you were just the driver for some organized crimes, and that was actually pretty interesting. But it was basically just the driving element of Grand Theft Auto.
Well, and again, it's like I totally remember playing adults, and there was a point where the adult would like there would be like one adult that would be everybody, and I would generally lose to that adult. But then it started shifting where it wouldn't necessarily be me, but some other kid could then challenge that adult. Like it was usually like Mortal Kombat or some fighting game or some shit like that, like Marvel vs. Capcom or something along those lines where it was quick paced, but also enough where people knew the game to gather around and watch, and that's where any time there was an arcade machine, there would inevitably be people that gathered around and started watching.
Yeah, I used to do that with Killer Instinct on the console, on the arcade console.
Well, and that's what I was about to say, that it was really the consoles that killed the arcade, like straight up. If anything, like the arcade culture was already on the decline, but consoles definitely killed arcade culture in the way that it used to be, and it wasn't like at first it wasn't as bad, but once online gaming became a thing, then it was like, yeah, they were completely.
I just remember spending like 50 cents on Killer Instinct and getting to the end of the game but and then somebody else would be like, "Can I play now?" And I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what you're talking about is effectively you do if you own a game for a while, you basically like people have to ask to take over if you're not gonna like if you don't lose
Yeah.
in a public queue, and it was like pretty standard culture, where it's like if somebody continues to win, then if you're like standing there waiting to play, then you ask them. Otherwise, it's like winner keeps playing until they get done.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I remember when in high school, me and my friends would go to the student union and we would just take over Street Fighter, and we would just get in line and just have, player versus player. And occasionally there would be some college student who really wanted to play, and they would just dump quarters in because they wanted to play, and that was cool. And some of them were really cool about it, actually. Some of them were like just like us, and they would just get in line and cycle through, and we'd engage in Street Fighter fisticuffs. And occasionally there'd be some dude who took it way too seriously and get pissed off. And it's just a game, though. So, but I did always appreciate when I would see some college student who like really took the time to learn like all of the combinations and could just like at will be like, oh yeah, this is how you do this and this is how you do this. Because occasionally you'd see somebody who had like absolute mastery of like E Honda or Blanca, and they could be difficult to play because they've got really strange moves. But or like a Dulcim master, like those guys, like those players, like they had some extra level of commitment to the not mainline characters.
And I went back. There's like a few like I went and tried to play Tekken after not playing for a long time, and I could not do it, man.
Dude, Tekken's hard.
It's not hard. I mean, that's part of it. I'm not saying it's not hard. The timing, I realized, is like off, and you'll push a button and the animation doesn't do anything. So I bought the new Tekken and fucking returned it immediately because I'm just a stickler for it's like if I'm going to press a button, I need the fucking game to respond. I need the animation to respond. Whereas on Tekken 7, I shit you not, there would be times where you press a button and because the other character has already started an animation, it won't like engage your character's animation correctly.
Ugh.
And it's one thing to get the timing off, but I would like you can turn on the button presses and see like if you're pressing something and it's not doing something. So I would like, and this also happened with King of Fighters where I'm like, now knowing that I can check the latency of like the button press to the animation response time, it's not just us. It's not us. These game designers are making it so that the latency between the button press and the animation is something you have to take into account when you play. So the people who are really good at Tekken know this. So it's like, oh, they can get over it, but it's because they understand the designer of that game's button press to animation latency window.
It'd be like if you wanted to punch somebody in Tekken, you've got to enter the combination to get all weapons in GTA.
Basically, I mean, in the sense of, in order to land something, because here's also the problem. They also adjust the latency window between your button press and the animation to feed their artificial intelligence and machine learning your style to respond. So the latency between the button press and your animation is when their machine learning is happening. And that can be modified, can be shortened, it can be extended. So a lot of times when games get more difficult, they're changing that window. So it's lengthening it slightly enough to where most people wouldn't notice it, but it's just giving them enough more window to get their machine learning algorithm to anticipate your moves just a little bit better. And it's things like that where I know too much about how games are designed that if the designer doesn't work hard enough to get those things invisible, then it makes it no fun for someone like myself. But then other game designers are able to overcome it. So it's not like every magician still can be amazed by a good magician. Just because they know how the magic works doesn't mean they can't be amazed ever again. That's not true. That's not the way magic works or the way skills work. And I think a lot of game designers have gotten lazy because enough people don't see their little tricks and they don't see the latency window shifts and shit like that. It's like, oh, they can get by, but it's like, man, I do, because that's where Tekken's, it's difficult, but because of the game design flaws, not because of the martial arts aspect. And that's why it's frustrating to me as a martial arts practitioner when they take these video games and make it seem as if it's difficult because they've made it some sort of like martial arts. I mean, clearly it's pseudo martial arts, but the way that they present it, it's if like, oh, this person is better at like fighting in this context. When it's like, no, they're actually, it's like the latency windows that that have been arbitrarily set that they are good within those frameworks. And that's why like online play, the difference between playing online with Tekken versus Injustice is like completely different. Because then in Injustice, you don't have that same type of latency, but you do have some characters that will cancel animations. And that's another thing. It's like if I come up against somebody who can do something that cancels the animation that my character goes into and by proxy makes me then vulnerable to a chain of attacks, it's like anybody who knows how to do the animation cancel attack can get over, like, for example, in this game, the One Punch Man game, I've calculated how long it takes for a character to get up. So anytime they get up, I can go throw them if I want to, but it's because like now I know the time it takes for the animation for them to get up is like, you know, 0.4 milliseconds or whatever. If I like do 0.4 milliseconds perfectly, but you have to time it. It's not just knowing it is one thing, but being able to time it is another aspect where it's still fun because the computer can adjust their timing. So I don't get it perfectly every time. So there's still some element of chance to it. Whereas professional gamers especially are inclined to try to find those exploits within the animations or within the timing and then take advantage of them against other players. And then it like takes the fun out of the game if you're in like a game with somebody who's just trying to take advantage of that gap just to win. So there's this like weird gap between having fun and just engaging in activity that's not fun for various reasons. And like video games, I feel from my perspective are generally meant to be mostly fun. You know, obviously there's tournaments, there's professional gaming, there's times when it's not purely about the fun aspect, but when the fun is taken out by the developer because the developer is trying to like unnecessarily make things hard using arbitrary means. And one of the worst offenders is like the Dark Souls series. Like I I hate that. I really hate that type of culture for various reasons because it's not real difficulty. It's like arbitrary difficulty, and I'm completely. I love real difficulty, and I play my games on the hardest settings usually. Um, but that's also why I want real difficulty, not just like, oh, they're gonna reduce uh, your hit points or something, or they're gonna if you get hit one time, it kills your character, whereas you have to hit the other person like 1,000 times. Like Horizon Zero Dawn's difficulty levels like that, where man, I really enjoy the game when it's like shining, but there's times where you'll come up against a boss or like some build or some level where that enemy will hit you one time or two times and you're dead, but you literally will have to hit them like hundreds of times. And I'm not
No,
exaggerating.
I've had that experience before too, where you have to run through what amounts to a combat puzzle, and it's not obvious what you have to do, or even in what order you have to do it. But if that shining ball of energy floats near you, it kills you. And then the rest of your team might still be alive when you respawn. They might not. And then if they aren't, you might have lost all your progress. But if you're lucky, one team member is alive. And then, all progress is not lost. You just got to go figure out the rest of the puzzle. And then a grenade goes off, and then you're dead again.
And what you're
hate levels like that. That's like the worst fucking grindy stage. It's not even, it's usually the middle of the level, too. It's like a gatekeeper. It's like, oh, if you can't get through this, you don't need to see the rest of the level.
And the fucked up thing is, effectively, you have to play it through perfectly to get past it.
Yeah.
And you're basically memorizing the steps. And I fucking hate memorization as part of like winning, because there is a school of thought that makes it a necessary part. And you'll see these people in the ones who memorize chess strategies and memorize specific moves and specific like sets. So like those people, I fucking can't stand them, honestly, because they take the fun out of games that could exist in real time, but they've done so much memorization that they make it so that if you want to compete on their level, you have to memorize the same amount of shit just to get to the point where you're actually playing in real time, because they're playing from memorization. And it's like, I get it. It's not that I don't get it. I could do it, but it's not a real time game. Those people are like literally living in someone else's past game when they do that shit. And that is like the exact opposite of fun to me. And maybe it's fun to them.
Yeah, so
I'm not trying to take that away from them.
They know how to do like every Kasparov opening, and they know every they know all the gambits, and they know how to respond to every response to all of them. That's
literally playing in the past.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah, they're just playing somebody else's.
That's the definition of playing in the past.
That's executing somebody else's chess match.
Exactly what that's doing. And it's, if you can have fun with that, good for you. That's great. I have nothing against that person.
That's like a really abstract version of putting together some Legos.
I mean, okay, that is a good comparison, because part of the like Lego, somebody else had to create that thing. Somebody had to put together the
design, the instruction.
The design. And when you put it together, the joy is in building it. So I understand those people are getting joy out of going through the motions. But if they're going through the motions to win, they're
competitive Lego assembly.
And that's where I'm like, it becomes this like, I'm not sure if I can accept that they're actually doing it for fun, or if they're just doing it to be better than someone else, to get satisfaction by seeing themselves be better than someone else. And that's what it feels like more to me, in that when you put together a Lego set, I guess there are Lego uh,
Master
tournaments.
builder tournaments.
Right, but usually those are not putting together someone else's design and they're coming up with your own design.
Yeah, they're making
so that's
cool
the difference
stuff.
between those. So that's where even then I'm like, those people, when they're doing that competition, they're not trying to recreate somebody else's build. They're trying to come up with their own build.
Yeah.
So it seems, well, again, because I don't have fun doing it, I can't understand why those people would do it, but I have a hard time accepting fun as the explanation, because what they're doing just does not seem like it actually can be fun. Like, if you have to sit there and memorize a bunch of shit, like, oh, you have fun memorizing stuff? Okay, I guess.
I mean,
Maybe.
if you want to place a song, there might be some memorization involved, but that's like performing an instrument. That's a very different thing than.
But that's not fun either, when you don't know the song and you're struggling through the notes.
Oh yeah, that
and
sucks.
You're trying to
that
get
really
the next
sucks.
fucking phrase. It sucks, and you can't hit the next. Like, that part is why a lot of people don't actually pick up instruments, because learning a song that you don't know fucking sucks almost every single time, because the sound of hitting an incorrect note, the feeling of struggling through a phrase that you don't yet know correctly, being at the end of a phrase and not knowing the next phrase and deciding whether you should pause or keep trying to play through a phrase you don't know. All that shit fucking sucks. Like, playing notation or music from notation or memory, either one sucks. And it's only when you're like playing music well and playing correctly that it doesn't suck. It's really crazy how much there's only a little bit of time that playing an instrument doesn't suck. And it's only when you're actually doing it really, really well.
Yeah, actually. There are times when practice is all right, when it's the kind of thing where you know that you're working at like a slow pace because you want to memorize a very specific thing, and you're just working on refining. That stuff can actually be really rewarding. I'm not going to say it's fun, but it's definitely rewarding.
There's a difference between rewarding and fun. Like,
yeah.
If anything,
but it doesn't suck.
Fun is because there's no like reward at risk a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's like the reward at risk takes the fun out of things in most cases. And that's where it's like someone being a professional and doing something for their life and for their occupation is completely different than somebody doing something for fun. And that's where like most of the people doing the things for their occupation probably aren't having fun in the middle of performing at the highest level. And that's where I'm like, it's really like, that's why I can't reconcile that argument about somebody memorizing shit for fun.
It just seems so strange that I guess I'm having a bit of a...
Like, it's fun being number one. It's fun winning, but the stress and the like actual...
You know, you just reminded me that like there have been a lot of times when I've met like professional musicians, and they're very professional, but they're also, you know, they're not, they're always performing. They're always on. And at a point, like, it's got to be pretty grating to be like, to always be in character, to only find like that personal time like at a hotel room if you're lucky, or in a van or a bus. There's probably like a real considerable burden of like creativity that traveling performers like endure, that we don't really like. They try to glorify it in like MTV Cribs and every so often we get a movie that kind of sheds some light on the history of some really famous musician. But I bet that it's a lot worse for people who never make it, who get like started in the process, and at some point it something happens, they give up.
Well, and that learned helplessness, man. It's like learned helplessness is such a
Wow, that's a fucking hard
it's
concept.
everywhere. Yeah.
And by hard, I mean like on a hardness scale. That's like that falls under the same umbrella of like a self-victimization, right? Woe is me. The sky is falling. But again, someone has to have time to be creative. They can't just make time, right? If we're scheduled 2 weeks out and there's a 2-week deficit. So really it's like a month offset.
Any given time. That's where I feel like most people are operating in that deficit and then feel the weight of needing a break from having that deficit constantly over their head and never actually end up getting to close that deficit because it's such a stressful deficit. And that's like, again, I'm not saying it's because people want too much. It's partially because they're told that they need more than they actually do. And it's not something that people are being really culturally driven towards. And that's like, if people were more pushed towards curating their spaces for their weekend activities rather than for storage for how they go out on the weekend, it would be a completely different culture. Like that small shift. Not to say, oh, you need to be hosting people in your home every weekend, but it's like people made it seem like being quote unquote stuck at home during the pandemic was a punishment. It's because their space wasn't curated. Like this space, if I got food delivered here, I could probably stay in here for like 3 or 4 years if I really needed to. In the way that when they talk about people going to Mars, they do that isolation test. And it's like, well, if the space is awesome, I don't really need to be out among a bunch of fucking code-having, mouth-breathing, non-mask wearing douchebags that like aren't actually contributing anything, just burning oil, like gas and being around.
Since the beginning of pandemic, I've maintained that this has been a very strange litmus test for who has the resilience for deep space travel to the new colony or whatever, to Mars. And because I remember right about month 3 when it starts to get warm. It's June. People want to go out. And then there are big pool parties that turn into COVID super spreader events. It just reinforced my analysis that this is just the best litmus test we've ever had to see who has the resilience for isolation of any kind. And granted, like, I live with somebody, so I always have somebody to talk to for the most part. And we have a vast communication network that allows us to communicate over distances. You and I communicate in real time for 2 hours a week, every week. And granted, it wasn't initially in the plan, we were able to respond to lockdowns and go completely remote, and have since. So there are ways to get around all of these things, and I think that a lot of the issues that people had with isolation really just came down to a lack of hobbies, and that ties into your curated space. If all the things that one wants to do involve leaving the house, and the home life, the world at home isn't built sufficiently to be enough to stay at home. I wonder if that's actually a home. I think that someone's home, like my home, I don't actually want to leave. Like, similarly to you, I have almost all the things that I need except for like food.
Yeah, the point is like, what becomes the impetus to leave that space when you don't need to? And it's like,
Making money.
just about, you know.
Yeah. Making money,
So
delivering something to somebody that I want to hand deliver something to, participating in hobbies that actually require leaving the house, which I have, but are a few of. But then there are all these external factors that limit like my willingness to even go outside. Like, if it's too fucking hot out, forget it. If I step outside and I'm like sweating in a matter of seconds, that means it's too hot. Too much humidity, at least. I'm not trying to suffer heat exhaustion. Like the other day, last Thursday, I was outside and I got to experience the wet bulb effect because I was sitting there and I realized my shirt was just completely drenched. So I took the thing off and set it down on. I just let it hang and air dry, and it took about 2 hours for it to dry out really slowly because there was very little breeze, and there was just enough breeze that I felt warm, but I wasn't really like, couldn't tell if I was evaporating moisture and cooling off. And this only lasted for like an hour, maybe 2 hours. Probably not 2 hours, just like, peak sun, peak heat of the day. This is the standard now. We're gonna have more of this kind of weather. It's gonna be, it's like the heat gets left on at night and for like a couple days, and then it goes away. Of course, for the last few years, we've had these polar vortex situations where it's like, 50 degrees, 60 degrees in the middle of summer. So
true. Yeah, we could get some polar vortex, but the way this summer's been moving so far, I'm thinking we're about to set some, not just us, but I think the world's about to see some heat records.
Oh, yeah.
Just like constantly throughout August.
Oh yeah. Well, Yosemite's on fire right now. Like, it burst into flames, like, I think yesterday or 2 days ago.
I did not see that.
Yeah. Well, fires in the West are common. They've been happening every year for the last decade, I think.
Yeah.
There's like a ring of fire around the planet that just emerges or just travels wherever it's summer.
Right. I mean, wildfires are normal to a certain extent,
But not like
but
it's...
not the way they've been happening.
No. Like, when the Amazon was on fire, that's just messed up because significant portions of the Amazon are supposed to be rich with waterways. And then when the Congo was burning, that was also kind of like, wait a second, this is like a lush tropical region. What the heck's going on? And then that giant fire across Australia. You can practically draw a straight line between those three locations. Of course, not really, because it's on the surface of a globe, so a curved line through. No, we've got like a bunch of things happening, and a lot of them have been ongoing. Russian escalation of tension everywhere. That's been ongoing for over a decade. Wildfires that spread across continents. That's been going on for a decade. Electric cars. We're like a decade into that now. This huge push for end of mile solar panels. Well, we're into that like 50 years, but it's almost affordable for some people. Not much has changed. Pandemic life. Man, that's just a grim analysis.
Well, it's hard to know where we are in things just because we're not getting any real honest government transparency. And I guess they kind of like nobody wants to be honest about what's happening, and even down to like this shit with Elon and Twitter. Twitter doesn't want to be honest about the deal. Elon doesn't want to be honest about why he made the deal in the first place, because then somebody pointed out that the entire reason he did this Twitter deal was to offload $8 billion worth of Tesla stock to make it seem like it was for the Twitter deal, but he was able to do that without impacting Tesla stock, as if he was dumping $8 billion worth. So
that sounds shifty as fuck. That's got to be illegal.
I mean, it would be if the SEC follows through on some of this shit. And also, this is where him doing it might have put him in this deal that he's on the hook for, and won't. People are like thinking he can just buy his way out of it, but that's not really the case. It's gonna have to go to court. So, man, depending on how the court rules, he might still be on the hook for $44 billion with Twitter's for overvalued Twitter stock.
Man, when a Tesla-powered Twitterverse is gonna be so fucking terrible.
He did his version of the DoorDash glitch. He thought he was getting one over, but that shit is coming back on his bank account. And Twitter's like, "Nah, bro, you gotta pay."
Aren't people encouraged to do like serious research into the companies that they think that they're gonna buy? Typically, when
called due diligence. You're supposed to do your due diligence. You know, anytime an accredited investor is doing anything, due diligence is part of their process, which is why they are accredited investors in the first place. Because first off, you have to have at least I think it's $250,000 it's either in the bank or in assets, and then $1 million worth of history in positive banking assets. So there's like all these things that you have to do to become an accredited investor in the first place. But when you're operating as an accredited investor, doing your own due diligence is literally part of being the investor. So if he got to a point where he's like, I signed this deal, but I didn't know that they were lying about this, that's on him. he didn't do his due diligence.
Man.
That's not going to hold up in court.
The
Exceptional
Verge,
Randos show
they
is
said
produced live in
Elon
Sunroom
Musk
Studios
proves
Space
he's
Capsule
not the
in
man to
partnership
save
with
the world.
KLST 103.5 RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional
can't
Randos
even
live
buy
stream on
Twitter and
YouTube
save
every
free
Sunday
speech.
between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story,
Let
idea, or
alone
question
get
that
us
you would
to
like
Mars
to
and
share, we want to hear from you.
save human race.
Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
7 years I've been in this place.